Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting bird's eye.
And I have it myself.
Alright, I mixed up 3 different varieties,
Which is why I like a lapel mic and
or variations of purple. We got a Payne's Gray, a medium,
disorder,
and a lighter purple.
Disorders,
And I'm just going to start hitting some shadows.
Tourette's, all these things.
Alright, about right there's good.
We think, we've diagnosed a kid with ADHD, now we've explained something. Well, no, it's not ADHD, it's Asperger's. Well, that explains it. None of that explains anything. It only describes it. These diagnoses are not real entities in the real world. They're just stuff that we put together to describe things. Now we think we've explained something. And FASD is the same thing. Now, what Van der Kolk says is that instead of all these different diagnoses, there's only one diagnosis, which is what he calls developmental trauma disorder. And that simply means that human beings develop an interaction with the environment. Not a big surprise, is it? If you had a garden in which the plants weren't developing properly, and they weren't growing as well, or maybe they were deformed or somehow, you could have the option of going out there and yelling at them, like we do with kids. Grow up! What's wrong with you? Look at that, you're crooked. Straighten up already. Well, look at your posture. Or we could recognize that if those plants weren't developing properly, there's something wrong with the environment. We wouldn't be asking what's wrong with the plant. We'd be asking what conditions for development is that plant not receiving? Nutrition, soil, irrigation, sunlight. Well, we now know from decades of scientific research that the human personality and the human brain itself, the physiology of the human brain itself, develops in interaction with the environment. And for the right kind of development, you need the right kind of conditions. I'll be speaking a lot more about that tomorrow in my workshop on ADHD and FASD, but to make a long story short, the essential condition for the proper development of brain circuits that govern our behavior and our emotional life. So brain circuits that govern our capacity to regulate our impulses so that we're not acting out all the time. Brain circuits that regulate our capacity to balance ourselves emotionally so we don't get too upset when something happens, so we can handle it. Brain circuits that handle our capacity to respond to stress. And other important to pay attention. All these important brain circuits need the right environment. And the essential condition is a non-stress, supportive parenting environment. Now if we look at society as a whole, and we see all these kids who are diagnosed with oppositionality, conduct disorders, ADHD, Tourette's, Asperger's, autism, all that, they all have stuff in common. What they have in common is poor impulse control, poor emotional self-regulation. So when they get upset, they throw tantrums. They can't stop themselves. Poor social cues. They can't read social cues very well. In other words, all the things that FASD kids don't have either. And in all these other cases, we're not saying it's because the mother drank too much, because the mother didn't drink. What happened was that those children were born to stressed parents under stressed circumstances. And in those conditions, the brain didn't develop properly. They couldn't develop properly. Now, if you look at FASD kids, what do we see? Not only do we see that the mothers may have drunk excessively during pregnancy, but if we ask, why did those women drink? Well, we've already answered that. It's because the woman was in pain emotionally and she needed to soothe the pain with the drink. In other words, she's a stressed woman. She has a lifelong history of distress. And she's in a distressful situation right now. Maybe she's in a relationship where she's being beaten. Maybe she's in a relationship where she's not being supported. Maybe she's living with an alcoholic male. Maybe she's all isolated. In other words, she's very, very stressed. But I can tell you already, and I'll say much more about it tomorrow, stress on a woman during pregnancy has an impact on the developing nervous system of the child, physiologically. So studies have shown that women who are stressed during pregnancy, their kids will have behavioral problems at age 3 or 4. Animals who are stressed during pregnancy, their offspring will be more likely to use cocaine and alcohol as adults. Much more evidence we shall present tomorrow. But what's obvious here, and what's evident, is that any woman who drinks is by definition a stressed woman. Not only that, I'll say more about this tomorrow, but again, stress in the first few years of life interferes with the development of the child's brain also. Now, any child born into a family where there's drinking in the family is born into a stress situation by definition. How do we know what is the effect of stress on the developing brain and what is the effect of alcohol? Well, in the case of the kids who've got the facial markings, or the brain scan findings, or the heart difficulty, the heart abnormalities, and so on, caused by the toxin, alcohol, well, you can clearly say that's the alcohol. But what about the many kids with the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder who don't have any of the physical markings at all? Can we say for sure that it's all because of the alcohol? Or is a lot of it perhaps due to the stress on the parenting environment? Now here's the good news though. The good news is the part that's due to the stress is actually reversible. Those brain circuits can be rewired in the child. There's something called neuroplasticity, which is the capacity of the brain to develop new circuits even later on in life. And that capacity is with us all our lives, and we know this from animal studies and human experience, that the brain can rewire. We can see this on brain scans. We can see it on autopsies. So if you give people the right conditions, in fact, you know something? Even those infants who are born with physical brain damage can develop new circuits later on in life. Studies in California have shown that you take rats and you deliberately brain damage them at birth, but then you expose them to an environment that's supportive and nourishing, they'll actually do a whole lot better. You can take mice where you've knocked out one of their genes that supports learning, but if you give them the right environment, you'll never know that that gene wasn't active in them. They learn just as well as other mice. In other words, there's much more capacity for repair and new development and new functions to arise in the human brain than we actually often credit. But what does that depend on? Well, just like the plant, it depends on the environment. So the key question is, how do we give kids the right kind of environment? And never mind giving up on anybody. Because you never know how much development they're capable of until you give them the right environment. Now the right environment, of course, involves a lot of loving and nurturing. It does not involve fancy techniques, necessarily. It does not involve a whole lot of technology. It involves lots of unconditional, loving attention. And that's what this dog did for this kid. And the point that they make in this article, and this dog is the only creature in that boy's life who does not react negatively when the kid acts out. In fact, he's trained to get in there, and even he can pick up when the kid is going to act out. He senses it and gets in there and tries to cheer the kid up, and you know, it's amazing. And as the article points out, that when the human brain can relax, then it can learn. So that for learning, you have to have a sense of comfort and safety. And when you got your emotional needs met, and you're loved and you're accepted, then your brain can relax and it can actually take on the task of learning, acquiring new information, and incorporating that new information. So even this heavily challenged little boy was severely physically affected by the alcohol. Even in him, the presence of the dog has meant a completely new lease on life. And he'll always be challenged, but there's capacities in him that nobody would ever known that he had if this dog had been brought into his life. A specially trained dog, by the way. But what the dog can provide is, of course, what ideally human beings could also provide if we weren't screwed up, all of us, which is this unconditional loving acceptance and the sense of intuitive connection. So that's what these kids need. That's also what the women need who drink. Because again, their drinking is no accident. And that caused me, finally, to look at the larger picture again. And that larger picture again is Canadian society. Now, a few years ago, our current Prime Minister apologized for the residential schools. You know, I think I've heard everything in the downtown east side and doing my travels, but then something happens and I think, this is impossible. So let me tell you a little story. So last year, a year ago, I was working with one of the native bands in BC, the Seashell Band, and I was working with a Peruvian plant called ayahuasca, which is a healing plant, one of these healing plants. It's hallucinogen. Ooh, it gives you visions. Healing visions. And we had a Peruvian shaman working with us, and I was working with supporting that work. And of course we were dealing with people who are addicted, women who are heavily into cocaine, men who are into alcohol, or both, or women, and, you know, and just the heavily addicted group of people. And I initiated this discussion about, look, well, let's just go, what happened to you in life? So one woman in her 50s told me that in a residential school, when she was 4 years old, and some of you would have heard these stories, but to me it was a shock. I thought I'd heard everything. I hadn't. When she spoke her native language, you know what they did? The nuns stuck a pin in her tongue to give her pain, so as to make her forget her language. Now, of course, that means she had to sit there the whole hour, because if she put her tongue back in her mouth, she would cut her lips or the inside of her mouth. This happened in this province, in this country, within the lifetime of many people in this room. And then we talk about drunken Indians. Then we say, why are they doing this to their kids? You know? And so when this apology came from Mr. Harper, well, that was a good thing. At least they acknowledged what happened. But it's not enough. In fact, I rather thought that the apology was meaningless. The reason it was meaningless is because it's not enough to apologize for something if you're going to keep doing the same thing. Now, it's not that we have residential schools in this country anymore. No, that we don't. So we can safely apologize for that. What we haven't apologized for yet is the destruction of people's ways of life. The destruction of the attempted, not successful, thank God, but the attempted destruction of their culture and the robbery of their resources. And why we haven't apologized for that? Because we're still doing it. Look right now, this northern pipeline that they want to build. The native communities across the north are lining up to oppose it, to express their concerns for their children, for the possible toxic effect, for the destruction, further destruction of their ways of life. And our government says that these people who are saying those things are just foreign agitators. But what does it mean to apologize when you're still going to rob people of what belongs to them? And when you continue to make their lives miserable? Then what do we expect except more addiction? And what's our government's response to that? To the addiction problem, to the fact that people are going to drink and break the law? To spend billions of dollars more in jails. So the same government that doesn't have the money for social services and wants to raise the rage for old age pensions because, you know, to save money, What we do have money for is to build more jails and to keep people in jail longer by toughening up the criminal code. And who's going to end up in those jails? Let me read you a paragraph from my book on addiction. Detective Sergeant Paul Gillespie, head of Toronto's Sex Crimes Unit, rescued children from the purveyors of internet pornography. That's what he did. He rescued these kids that were being abused on the internet. As the Globe and Mail reported on his retirement from police work, 6 years at that job had not inured him to the horrors that he witnessed. Paul Gillespie still can't get used to the sounds of crying and pain, says the Globe article, and the graphic videos of children being raped and molested that he has seen all too often on the web. It's beyond horrible to listen to the soundtracks of these movies, said Canada's best-known child porn cop. But it is the silent images of desolate children that tear most at his heart. They're not screaming, just accepting, he said, of the infants captured in his pictures. They have dead eyes. You can tell that their spirit is broken. That's their life. He's talking about 2-year-olds. Those 2-year-olds are going to end up drinking and using drugs. And if that same policeman, think about this one, if that same policeman, instead of quitting the force, transferred to the drug squad, who do you think he'd be chasing in the streets? Those children that he didn't rescue. Because they're the ones who become the addicts. They're the ones who become the alcoholics. So here we have the paradox of we try to protect and rescue kids from trauma if we can. And if we can't, we put them in jail 20 years later. And this is what we call a civilized country. This is what we call the best country in the world to live in. For who? Not for the vulnerable. Not for the people that suffer the multi-generational trauma of what this history, our history, has imposed on them. Well, there's good news in all this. The good news is that children's brains are malleable and plastic, even adults' brains, so that if we actually can create the conditions for the healthy development, that development will take place. And a lot more kids can do a whole lot better if we get all that. If we don't just dismiss them as this diagnosis and that diagnosis, and that means it's hopeless. Because none of these conditions are written in stone, and even as much about FASD that's reversible. I'm not dismissing here the toxic effect of alcohol. I'm just saying there's a lot there besides that, and that's what Natalie said in the first place. That there's a lot of continuity between these conditions and a lot of similarity. And so that the approach has to be also similar, which is to recognize that underlying all of them, including fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, there's a lot of childhood stress and trauma, multi-generational. And if we go to work on supporting these families and helping these families, and helping these children, and in our schools and kindergartens and institutions, and especially if we ever had the wisdom to stop spending the money in the utterly inhumane and non-productive and from every angle useless, worse than useless, criminalization of people who use substances because they're too much in pain, well, we could actually get somewhere. And finally, when I look at the qualities or the teachings of traditional cultures around the world, whether in Peru or in North America or in Canada or in BC, what do we find? We see a recognition of the interconnection of things. We see the importance of connection to the land, of being grounded. We see the importance of nature. We see forgiveness. We see witnessing of one another's pain. We see listening. We see inclusion. We see restorative justice. We see ceremony. We see communal chanting and the creation of communal spaces. In other words, all the qualities necessary for healing are actually present in traditional teachings. So I think that for us to help heal the ones who most need it, but also for us to heal as a society, we need to drop the arrogance that science somehow will give us the answers. That realize that the answers have been here with us all along. We just haven't paid attention to them. And if we did, our whole society would be much more happy and much more humane. Thank you. If I could live my life over again, I'd live it very differently. You know, if I could parent them again, I'd not be the same person. Because although I didn't have an alcohol or any substance addiction, I was a workaholic. And I wasn't around for my kids emotionally. And you don't have to have alcohol or a substance to be addicted to in order to hurt your kids. All you have to do is to be emotionally absent. So this issue of parental guilt and caregiver guilt, I mean, I deal with it. Because my kids got issues. As adults, they have issues. And those issues I know would not be there had I been a different parent. That's just the reality, that's how it is. But if I look at it objectively, did I choose to be that way, or is there something driving me that I wasn't aware of? Maybe I had some pain I was trying to drown through my work. Maybe I felt not wanted in this world because of stuff that happened to me early in life, and then my way of compensating was to make myself a
Alright, so that gets a little bit of shadow,
accentuate
accentuates some of the highlights, drapes some cloud shadows over the hills right here, mountain tops, and gives it a little more of a playful character. I kind of dig it. So that's it for the moment. Next step will be highlights again. And then we'll probably find a place for a bird to be floating around in there, and some nice contrast, or perhaps about right here-ish somewhere. And kind of the wing aimed towards the viewer, and the head turned looking at the viewer as well under the wing is what I'm kind of hoping to go for there. But that's going to be a little tricky, so I want to get the clouds nice and solid before I mess with that. But that's it for the moment. As I said, that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting bird's eye. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening, Earth.